April 14, 1945. Hereford, Texas. The train lurched to a stop beneath a sky so wide it hurt to look at. Inside the cattle car, 17 German women sat frozen on wooden benches, hands gripped tight, faces drained of color. They had crossed an ocean expecting labor camps, barbed wire, American brutality. Instead, the door slid open to reveal dust, heat, and a weathered man in a Stetson holding fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these untold chapters of history, like and subscribe so you don't miss future stories. Leave a comment sharing where you're watching from Texas, Berlin, or anywhere else in the world. Now, back to April 1945, and a moment that would shatter everything these women had been taught to believe. The smell hit them first. Yeast and butter and warmth, a scent so foreign it felt like a memory from another lifetime. One woman, Marguerite Fisher, 31 years old, schoolteacher from Hamburg, began to cry before she even tasted it. She wept because in that single moment, standing in a Texas rail yard with bread in her hands, she realized every word of Nazi propaganda had been a lie. The panhandle heat shimmered like water over asphalt. Dust devils twisted across the rail yard, spinning themselves into nothing against the wooden platform where Sheriff Tom Mackenzie stood waiting. He had been told to expect prisoners the word carried weight in 1945. Images of danger, enemy soldiers, people who had bombed London and marched through Paris. Instead, 17 women stepped down from the train car, blinking against the light like creatures emerging from caves. They wore faded gray dresses, issued somewhere between Germany and New York, their shoes mismatched, broken-heeled, too large or too small scraped against the platform boards. Every woman bore the same expression, hollow-eyed exhaustion mixed with terror. Marguerite Fisher had taught children in Hamburg for 9 years. Beside her stood Ursula Brown, 24, who had worked in a textile factory before the regime drafted her for auxiliary service. There was Greta Koenig, barely 19, still clinging to fragments of propaganda she had heard in her village near Munich. None of them had fired a weapon. None had served on the front lines. They were clerks, nurses, telephone operators, women caught in the collapse of a crumbling empire. Mackenzie removed his hat. The gesture was instinctive, the kind his father had taught him when women entered a room. The guards behind him, local ranchers deputized for the day, did the same. The German women stared. In their experience, men with authority did not remove their hats. Men with authority shouted, struck, herded people like cattle, and laughed while doing it. Mackenzie spoke, his voice carrying the slow drawl of West Texas, words spaced out like fence posts across empty range. You folks will be staying at the Whitaker Ranch, helping out with cooking, cleaning, mending. Fair work for fair treatment. Plenty of food, clean beds. No harm coming to you here. Marguerite understood some English and translated softly for the others. The women exchanged wary glances. They had been told Americans were savages who worked prisoners to death, that Texas cowboys were brutal men shaped by violence. Nothing they saw supported that. They were loaded onto flatbed trucks and clung to the wooden sides as the vehicles bounced across endless prairie. The sky stretched vast and impossibly clear. Germany's ruins felt like another universe. This land seemed untouched by war. The Whitaker Ranch sat 15 miles outside Hereford, low buildings around a central yard. Corrals, a weathered White House, a bunkhouse, and a freshly painted structure that would be the women's quarters. Inside were 17 cots with blankets and crates, a wood stove, and a basin with clean water, more comfort than expected. Sarah Whitaker stepped out as they arrived. At 56, sun-worn and steady, she carried the authority of someone who had survived drought and the Depression. Widowed, she now ran the ranch with her son Jack and 5 cowboys, too old or injured for service. She watched the women climb down, braced for punishment. "Welcome to the ranch," she said, laying out rules and meal times. Marguerite translated as "the women stared, confused by her kindness." That evening, Sarah brought them into the kitchen. "I'm going to teach you how we make bread here," she said, pulling out flour, yeast, butter, and eggs, ingredients the women hadn't seen in years. As Sarah mixed the dough, explaining each motion, the women gradually joined. Ursula knelt beside her, matching her rhythm, forgetting for a moment she was a prisoner. The scent of baking bread filled the room, mingling with real coffee, dark and strong, not the acorn substitute they'd endured. When Sarah sliced the first loaf and passed it around, the women held it reverently. Marguerite tasted it and began to cry. Others followed, eating and weeping as the lies they'd believed dissolved in the warmth of bread freely given. Sarah said nothing, simply pouring more coffee and letting them grieve. Days settled into routine. They rose before dawn, donned denim and cotton clothes, cooked breakfasts for the ranch hands, and learned ranch work from Jack and the older cowboys, Luther, Hank, Carlos, Tom, and Billy, who taught with patient gestures and calm repetition. Greta, the youngest, worked with Luther and the horses. Terrified at first, she soon discovered the animals responded to gentleness, not force. By week's end, she was grooming them alone, murmuring in German. Summer brought heat and deeper tans. The women gained calluses and fragments of English. The cowboys learned bits of German. Marguerite kept a diary chronicling the quiet breaking of her beliefs. June 12, 1945. Sarah taught me pie crust. I once taught children Americans were cruel. I am ashamed. June 24th, Luther gave Greta a horse book. He expects nothing. July 3rd. Fireworks practice. Ursula sang. No one stopped her. The 4th of July redefined explosions. Sarah declared a holiday, roasted a pig, filled tables with pies and salads. At night, fireworks burst harmlessly overhead. The German women watched from the porch, remembering bombs, witnessing celebration instead. Ursula sat beside Carlos. He handed her a beer. They watched the sky for a long time before he spoke, his English slow and careful. My grandfather came from Spain. People here didn't trust him at first, said Spanish weren't really white, weren't really American. He proved them wrong by working hard, treating people fair. You folks are doing the same. Ursula did not fully understand all the words, but she grasped the meaning. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. By August, mail service was established. The women could write letters to Germany if they had anyone left to write to. Marguerite wrote to her sister in Hamburg, assuming the address still existed. Dearest Helga, I am alive and safe in a place called Texas. It is difficult to explain what has happened here. We are prisoners technically, but we live better than we did in the final year of the regime. We have food, real food, more than we can eat. We have beds and clean water and work that is hard but fair. The Americans who guard us are not what we were told. They are farmers and ranchers, simple men who do not hate us. Their boss is a woman who lost her husband, but still treats us with kindness I do not deserve. I think often of what we believed, how thoroughly we were deceived. These people we called enemies have shown more humanity than our own leadership ever did. I am ashamed of what I supported. I am grateful to be here, though it means I am far from you. Not all the women had someone to write to. Greta's family had died in the bombing of Munich. Ursula's husband was missing, last seen retreating east ahead of Allied forces. For them, the ranch became a kind of refuge, not home, but a place where the future might be imaginable. Sarah noticed their loneliness. She began inviting them to sit on the porch after dinner, bringing out lemonade or coffee, encouraging them to talk about their lives before the regime. Slowly, stories emerged. Marguerite's memories of teaching, the pride she felt when a slow student finally learned to read. Ursula's descriptions of working in the textile mill, the patterns she had woven, the friends she had made. Greta's recollections of her village, the church bells on Sunday mornings, her mother's garden. Sarah shared her own stories in return. Growing up during the Depression, marrying Robert when she was 19, building the ranch from almost nothing, losing him to a heart attack 3 years ago. She spoke of her son Jack, her fears that he would be drafted before the regime surrendered. She showed them photographs of Robert, of Jack as a boy, of the ranch in earlier years. The women studied the photographs with fascination. These were enemy people, according to propaganda. Yet their lives looked remarkably similar to German lives, families, work, pride in land, well tended. The similarities were more striking than the differences. September brought cooler weather and news from Germany. The full extent of the regime's actions was becoming public. Reports of camps where civilians had been detained, and worse. Photographs of skeletal survivors, testimony from liberators who found evidence of systematic brutality beyond anything the women had imagined. Marguerite read about Hamburg in a newspaper Sarah brought to the ranch. The city she had called home had been used as a staging area for policies she had dismissed as enemy propaganda. She sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper spread before her, and felt her understanding of reality collapse. Sarah found her there an hour later, still staring at the paper. The older woman did not speak at first. She simply made tea, set a cup beside Marguerite, and sat down across from her. "I didn't know," Marguerite whispered. "We were told it was enemy lies." We thought. Sarah raised her hand gently. "I believe you. Not everyone who was there was responsible. But now you know. Question is what you do with that knowledge." Marguerite looked up, her eyes red. "How can I live with this? How can any of us? Same way anyone lives with shame and guilt. You acknowledge it, you carry it, and you do better going forward." She paused, sipping her tea. "You're young enough to have a whole life ahead. Don't waste it on self-destruction. Use it to be someone different than who you were." That night, Marguerite gathered the women in their quarters. She showed them the newspaper, translating the articles. Some of the women refused to believe it. Greta insisted it was American propaganda, that their leadership would not have done such things. Others, like Ursula, had suspected but had not wanted to face the truth. The argument that followed was fierce, conducted in rapid German that none of the Americans could understand. Voices rose, accusations flew, old loyalties clashed with new realities. Finally, Marguerite stood on her cot, commanding attention. "Look around you. Look at how we've been treated here. Look at what we were told versus what we've experienced. If they lied about Americans being brutal savages, what else did they lie about?" The silence that followed was heavy. One by one, the women began to confront what they had supported, actively or passively. It was painful, that confrontation, easier to believe the propaganda had been true, that they had been on the right side. But the evidence was all around them. In the kindness of cowboys, in bread baked by a woman who had every reason to hate them, in the simple dignity of being treated as human beings despite being enemies. October meant harvest. The ranch's gardens produced pumpkins and squash and late tomatoes. Sarah organized the women to help with canning, preserving food for winter. The kitchen became a production center, pots boiling on the stove, jars cooling on every available surface. It was during this work that true friendships formed. The shared labor, the satisfaction of seeing shelves filled with preserved food, the practical skills being passed from American to German, all of it broke down the final barriers. The women began singing while they worked, German folk songs that Sarah did not understand but enjoyed hearing. Sometimes Sarah would teach them American songs, simple melodies like Red River Valley that the women could learn phonetically. Luther taught Greta to ride. He started her on the oldest, gentlest mare, leading the horse around the corral while Greta gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles. After a week, she could walk the horse independently. After 2 weeks, she managed a slow trot. By the end of October, she was riding across the pasture with confidence, her face lit with joy that had nothing to do with politics or war or shame. Jack Whittaker found himself drawn to Ursula. She was closer to his age, and despite the language barrier, they discovered they could communicate through work. He showed her how to fix a broken fence, how to read the sky for weather, how to gentle a nervous calf. She showed him German embroidery stitches, taught him a few words of her language, shared stories about textile patterns that had meanings beyond decoration. Nothing romantic passed between them. The circumstances made that impossible and inappropriate. But there was respect, the kind that grows between people who recognize competence in each other. When Ursula successfully predicted a storm by watching the cattle's behavior, Jack nodded his approval. She had learned. Sarah insisted the German women join the main Thanksgiving meal. She cooked turkey and stuffing, and mashed potatoes, and 3 kinds of pie. The Cowboys came dressed in their cleanest clothes. Jack invited neighbors from surrounding ranches, other families who had heard about the German prisoners and were curious. The dining room table stretched nearly the full length of the room, extended with boards set on sawhorses and covered with white sheets. 17 German women sat alongside American ranchers, farmhands, and their families. For a moment, before the meal began, the scene teetered on the edge of awkwardness. Then Sarah asked Luther to say grace. The old cowboy removed his hat, closed his eyes, and spoke in his West Texas drawl. Lord, we thank you for this food, for this land, for the people gathered here. We're grateful the fighting's done, and folks can start healing. Bless these women who've come so far. Bless us with wisdom to be kind. Amen. The meal began slowly, conversation hesitant at first, then warming. Neighboring families asked the German women about home, work, and plans after the prisoner program. The women, their English improved, answered in turn and asked about Texas, ranching, and American customs. Marguerite spoke with a woman named Dorothy, whose son had died at Normandy. Expecting anger, she instead found curiosity. Dorothy asked about Hamburg, about Marguerite's teaching, about her future. When Marguerite expressed sorrow for Dorothy's loss, Dorothy nodded. War takes from everyone. Germans lost sons too. That doesn't make it right. What your government did, but it doesn't make you evil for being German. She added that her son had written home about the frightened young Germans he guarded. If he could see that, I can too. The meal lasted hours. Afterward, Carlos played guitar. Someone added harmonica, and the Cowboys sang Western songs. Then Ursula lifted a German folk song, joined by the women. The Americans didn't understand the words, but they understood the longing. Winter passed with cold and wind. The women learned the stove, layered clothing, and grew fond of the main house kitchen. Christmas brought a small celebration, a tree, paper decorations, simple gifts. Marguerite carved Greta a wooden horse. Ursula embroidered handkerchiefs. The Cowboys offered gloves, socks, and a book of poetry for Marguerite. By spring, the program neared its end. Some women would return to Germany. Some could apply for residency. Marguerite chose Hamburg, determined to teach again. Greta hoped to stay and work with horses. Ursula was torn, unsure whether her husband lived or whether Germany still felt like home. At the final dinner, the mood was bittersweet. Sarah stood, "War put us on opposite sides, but people can be better than their governments. Kindness matters more than politics, and bread, good bread, can change hearts better than propaganda." The women laughed through tears. Marguerite translated and added, "We came expecting cruelty. We found humanity. I cannot undo what my country did, but I can live differently because of what you showed us." Stories and addresses were exchanged. Luther gave Greta a small horseshoe. Carlos taught Ursula a last chord. Jack gifted Marguerite a leather journal. Under the vast Texas sky, the women walked to their quarters, no longer as enemies, but as people who had discovered a larger, kinder world. Marguerite returned to Hamburg in 1946, resumed teaching, and corresponded with Sarah for decades. Greta stayed in America, became a respected horse trainer, and carried the lesson of gentle strength. Ursula learned her husband had died, settled in Hereford, married Jack, and helped run the ranch. Her Apfelstrudel became locally famous. Years later, Greta told a historian, "The bread proved everything we'd been taught was a lie. It let us become something better." And the Panhandle sky remained wide enough to hold that truth.